Weird, right? This is David Lynch's 2002 sitcom Rabbits. Well, it's what he refers to as his 8-episode sitcom anyway. And although Wikipedia likes to keep good standards of categorization by referring to it as a series of short horror web films, for the purposes of this experience, I'm going to refer to it as a sitcom as well. Because it's just funny too. So, what is Rabbits about? We've just seen a 30-second segment, so we should have a pretty good idea of how to surmise it in a sentence or two. So I'm going to give it a shot. Rabbits is a sitcom about 3 rabbits, I think. Well, let's see if we can get some inspiration from the tagline. The tagline for this series describes it as follows. In a nameless city deluged by continuous rain, 3 rabbits live with a fearful mystery. Which is accurate, and it's also a technically correct description of the short horror web film, the sitcom, whatever it is, but it is so much more than that. Taking a description in the most literal and technically correct sense possible, Rabbits is a series about 3 humanoid rabbits who act strangely, have an out-of-order conversation, and one of whom continuously irons the same item of clothing and then occasionally worships some kind of demon-like thing which appears in the corner of the room. All taking place in what looks like a living room. Oh, and the wall sets itself on fire from time to time as well. David Lynch, to me anyway, is a kind of fascinating character in terms of his filmmaking. I discovered his work during my first year of media college back in 2013, where at the time I was going through a phase in which I had to find the most obscure, the most horrific, the most disgraceful and the most disturbing media I possibly could. Salo, a Serbian film, August Underground, Cannibal Holocaust, Irreversibly, you name it, I've likely seen it. The reason why Lynch holds such a special place in my heart is because he was my first introduction to the idea of plotlessness. Now, plotlessness isn't really a real word, as evidenced by both Google not defining it. Define plotlessness. Define plotlessness. Define plotlessness. Define plotlessness. And Microsoft Word clearly saying,
Computer says no.
Plotlessness is most commonly used as a pejorative, an insult to a film or any art piece really that would traditionally contain a narrative or story which may have failed to come to realization in the final product due to either incompetent filmmakers or otherwise interference. You can usually tell when something suffers from plotlessness because your favourite online critics sarcastically tear it to shreds in a video. If your movie sucks, you'll see it there. But today we're talking about plotlessness in a positive light, a learning light if you will, because I believe that it gets a bad rap. And as you've probably guessed, this video is slightly bigger than Rabbits, which I promise we'll get back to in a second. You see, before discovering Lynch, everything I watched had to have a plot to it, because that's just the way things go when you're brought up on a steady diet of Hollywood, Bollywood or Nollywood. A piece of media exists and therefore there's a beginning, a middle and an end. The first act, second act, third act structure with character arcs, relatable themes and complex storylines. After all, if it didn't have a plot, then what's the point of its existing in the first place? The world of Lynch opening up in front of me made my world a much more interesting place to be, and then of course the world, when I realised what could be out there. But here's the thing, that's probably what instigated me looking up all those horrific movies. I just realised that in recording this voiceover. Because here's the thing, the world isn't binary, it's not just black and white, it's made up of a series of shades, and those shades contain everything you can think of and everything you cannot. That's a rather long-winded, philosophical and interpretable way of saying that you can like a piece of art simply because of the way it makes you feel. It doesn't have to contain a well-crafted story or comprehensible narrative for it to be enjoyable. And to be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't really matter what the critics think of it. It can just be that certain qualities about the art bring you joy just by consuming it, or even just by thinking about it. But anyway, getting back to Rabbits. There is something that I want to zero in on with Rabbits, and it's as to why it's categorized as a horror film. Because short web films, I can understand, but short horror web films, why is the horror there? How do you feel when you watch Rabbits? I mean, other than the initial weirdness and perhaps slight boredom if it's new to you and you've never seen anything like this before, how do you feel? Do you feel uneasy? Perhaps there's a sense that something's off. There's something about it that you just don't like. It just doesn't feel right. It's not scary per se. It doesn't make you want to watch it through your fingers like Freddy Krueger might, but it's just uncomfortable. Why? Why is it so uncomfortable? Well, to understand why we feel the way we feel about anything, we first need to read the situation and listen to what our senses are telling us. The very first thing we experience with rabbits is drone-like ambient music composed by Angelo Badalamenti. Establishing shots and sounds set the scene for what's to come in any piece of media. Music and sound has a majority effect on us, much more so than the visuals, so already our senses react and we're on alert. What we see visually is a strange visual presentation. Flickering video with a spotlight torch as the title fades in, accompanied by a harsh drop shadow against a dreary background, followed by the shadow of a rabbit's head. We're over 30 seconds in at this point, and the music hasn't lifted from its original drone, except for perhaps a change in pitch. Then we fade in to the show. And boy oh boy is there a lot of visual and oral data to unpack here. That's oral spelled A-U-R-A-L, which is esoteric filmmaker vernacular. A few questions. Why are they dressed as rabbits? Why do they move in such bizarre and inhuman ways? Why does it always feel like something is going to happen but nothing ever does? What is the point of this? So let's analyse. First things first, the architecture. The way the living room is constructed is bizarre to say the least. The doorway looks very tall, especially with that window at the top. The walls extend off of the screen, and the majority of the middle of the frame is empty space. This to me gives a sense of miniaturization, where the film is taking place inside a miniature set similar to a stop motion animation. But of course, this is false, and we know this from the fact that there are human actors in this. This is a visual conflict that our eyes cannot resolve despite constantly trying to. I focus on the rabbit on the sofa, and the bizarre architecture alleviates. I move my eyes to encompass the entire room, and my head just can't compute what it's seeing. Secondly, the camera angle. Rabbit stays at this uncomfortable angle throughout its entire runtime. It never once moves. The positioning of the camera is slightly off center to the right, and the panning appears to be resolved to the left to keep the rabbits in frame. And the physical placement of the camera itself appears to be set quite a bit above the action. The camera being so far away means that we can't get an intimate look at what's taking place. Instead, we're simply observing from afar. Thirdly, the lighting. The lighting in Rabbits is oppressive to say the least. Rabbits is crushed by harsh shadows present on both the floor and the walls. Shadows are foreboding and repressive in the first place, so having giant rabbit heads float ominously above the set of actual anthropomorphized rabbits adds another layer of detail to the derangements happening in front of us. What's interesting about these shadows is that while you may not consciously pick up on their presence in the room, your eyes definitely do. But with the lighting we can go even deeper. Where are those shadows on the archway originating from anyway? There are only two visible sources of light that I can see on set, and neither of them are pointing directly at the rabbits on the sofa. So why are those shadows there? Typically, most TV sitcoms prefer to light the set evenly for a myriad of reasons, including time and convenience. But this isn't most TV. This is David Lynch. In order to achieve his third eye's vision, Lynch controlled the light by both filming at night and by lighting the setup with enormous noisy lights, which according to Lynch was a beautiful thing, a sentiment that I'm sure his neighbours shared. Why did Lynch's neighbours share that sentiment, you may ask? Well, it's because Lynch filmed rabbits in his back garden, as you do. It's just a small piece of trivia that's always tickled me for some reason, because of course Lynch filmed this in his back garden. That's such a Lynch thing to do. He even slept on the set of Eraserhead when he wasn't meant to. Analysis shouldn't just stop at the more practical and utilitarian side of things, however. We can and should highlight and analyse aesthetic choices as well, because they aren't there just for the sake of it. They are choices specifically implemented by the filmmakers to appear in the scene, and as good media students, it's our job to pay attention to the smallest detail. Which brings me on to one of the most important elements of filmmaking, and one that I would be remiss not to analyse. A key detail to filmmaking, a detail that influences much more than we realise, and one that's staring us right in the face throughout the entire runtime and is impossible not to see. The colour palette. Rabbits is dominated by one colour in particular. The colour brown. Brown door, brown radiator, brown carpet, brown sofa, brown ironing board, brown side table, brown rabbits. You get the idea, there's a lot of brown. This strange colour dominance makes the set of Rabbits kind of disgusting to look at. Mostly because humans aren't used to seeing one colour infiltrate so much of our visual field in such an aggressive way, especially in a place traditionally meant for living and relaxing. And also not to mention the fact that brown is just not nice as a colour. For example, the colour of the floor of rabbits is brown, and to me it looks almost like it's trying to hide away in plain sight, which probably adds to the already strange visual oddities we have in rabbits. Does anybody else feel like the phone is too far away from the sofa? And what's up with this weird space here? Whose living room even looks like this anyway? This all culminates in an uncomfortable visual presentation. Sound. Sonic. The aural sphere. Sound is arguably the most important aspect of a film. And if that reads a bit far-fetched, because surely the visuals must be the most important part because, you know, they're what you look at, here's an obscure indie filmmaker to talk about the importance of the soundscape.
I think, you know, the sound really is the hardest thing for a no-budget film, you know, to really try and, you know, compete with the type of filmmaking and entertainment that people are used to, because they're used to watching very polished presentations. And so we did a couple of things on following. One of the things I did, and I was explaining this to our sound mixer the other day, I think he was a little taken aback that we'd done it on purpose, but one of the things I figured out is if we start the film in voiceover, and if we started with the first scene in a very controlled environment with two people just talking where we knew we could get good sound, you could begin the film in such a way that people weren't immediately alienated by the quality of the sound. And so you could get 3-4 minutes into the film before you hit them with this terrible, you know, camera noise, cars going by, you know, whatever.
So long as the sound of the film is relatively pleasant to listen to, people will watch it without much complaint, and because sound has such an incredibly high barrier for entry, you can get away with a hell of a lot in terms of visuals. People won't sit through bad sound, but you can get them to sit through a bad picture, so long as the story is good, or it's been extremely creatively edited. The dialogue. The dialogue in Rabbits appears to be complete, inchoate nonsense, full of non sequiturs. However, it's probably designed to be used in a much bigger sense than the sum of its parts. It likely acts as a Lynchian love letter to other art pieces such as Alain René's Last Year at Marienbad.
Vous m'aviez demandé de ne plus vous revoir.
Laissez-moi.
And also as an atmospheric tool used to convey to the audience the fearfulness of these rabbits. As mentioned previously, our first experience with rabbits isn't visual, it's aural. That's aural spelled A-U-R-A-L, which is, again, esoteric filmmaker vernacular. It's a slow, dreary, unnerving, unwelcoming drone. After the title cards are finished, the drone is accompanied by the sound of rain. Now, the rain for this show is pretty much consistent and heavy throughout, but an interesting thing that I found is that the heaviness of the rain doesn't really match up with the universe that the show has created. What I mean is that to me, it doesn't sound like it's raining in the world of rabbits, it sounds like it's raining in my headphones. This would generally be considered a mistake in editing in normal media, but considering the context of what we're watching, it can be seen as adding yet another layer of abstraction. The laugh track. Rabbits has a laugh track, because of course it does. It's loud, it's long, and it's not really cohesive with what's happening in the show itself. The laugh track operates as if somebody was really tired and fell asleep during the editing of the show with a big laugh track button in their hand, and as they were dreaming, they just kept accidentally pressing it at random points for long periods of time, so we end up with this, and that's just hilarious to me. The laugh track also presents an interesting juxtaposition. In most sitcoms, the situations are often light and comedic, with the laugh track adding a layer of uplifting engagement for the viewer. In Rabbits, however, the characters are extremely serious throughout, and they say nothing which would constitute a live and roaring studio audience. And yet, they have one. In post anyway. The laugh track is also open to interpretation, so if you're a pretentious film student, you could say that it's a deliberate action to mock traditional sitcoms that use laugh tracks simply to tell the audience when there's a funny
Come here!
Bazinga.
Or you could just see it as Lynch having a bit of fun, which I kind of fall mostly into the latter, but a little bit into the former as well, I have to be completely honest. You see, what I love about Rabbids isn't something objective that you can categorise and rank and give a critical review and star rating to. What I love about Rabbids is everything I've mentioned in this video, which can be summed up in one singular word. Atmosphere. Atmosphere is an umbrella term for everything contained in any creation. The mise-en-scène, the sound, the rain, the laugh track, the texture, the feeling, the everything. Everything that has gone into cooking this thing into the final product that it is. I enjoy the strange acting in Rabbids. I enjoy the music by Angelo Badalamenti. I enjoy that to me the set looks miniature because of the architecture and the positioning of the camera. I enjoy the soundscape. I enjoy Rabbids because it's different. Not because it's different than what most people like, but because it's interpretable in so many different ways. Hence this video. An entire video about a show about nothing, really. This video is an interpretation that is neither right nor wrong, and I'm sure the comments of this video are going to hugely disagree with me on that point.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong.
Being neither right nor wrong isn't really something that sits well with the human condition, however. We like resolutions, we like a result. Narrative is what we create to organise the chaos of the world, so when something seemingly doesn't have an objective narrative or reason for being, we either dismiss it as useless or we try to force a narrative onto it. When in reality, maybe it should be allowed to exist in the way it was created. Open to interpretation. The great thing about art is that everybody has a different interpretation. While I get one thing, you get another, and then we discuss that thing, and through that discussion and the sharing of ideas, we both learn, both about the art and about ourselves. Our answers and interpretations tell us a lot about ourselves, and our perceptions are shaped by our life experience. Everybody has different life experience, so if we all come together and talk, it enriches everybody because we all learn how different people live and the reason for different people's points of view. It's good to talk about things because in a safe and healthy environment, and also in an appropriate environment for the discussion that you want to have, because the sharing of ideas is always good. Nobody's above learning, and if somebody does think they're above learning, they're a idiot. Perception really is reality. Your perception is your reality, and hindsight is always 20/20. An argument that I've heard a lot is that media students can often read far too much into a piece of media. Did the filmmakers really intend that level of detail, or are we just talking interior semiotics? Not nonsense, if that wasn't clear. The thing is that I get an immense amount of reward out of doing this kind of thing, out of analysing media. You see, I'd rather say far too much and ignite a discussion and get people thinking and talking than say far too little and never give a potential learning experience the air it needs to come to life. Or, as the great scholar of our time, Shrek, would say,
better out than in, I always say.
The next video analysis is going to be on the 2012 independent Scottish film Shell, starring Joseph Morley and Chloe Pirrie. It's one of my favourite films of all time, and I'd recommend watching it as many times as you possibly can before I go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Bear in mind that I made a 6-page script about something that doesn't have any perceptible plot or narrative to it, and so if the next video is going to have plots and narrative to it, I wonder how much I'm going to write. I hate myself. Please save me. Please save me. Please save me from myself. And cut.